Hey there, it's Jordan. I am delighted to be joined by Jake Hanrahan with Popular Front. He is a documentary filmmaker and journalist who reports independently on the front lines of many conflict zones on war and is currently in Kiev in Ukraine on the ground reporting on the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Thanks for joining me. So there's a lot of information coming from Western media. A lot of it seems propagandish to me. So I'm happy to have you. Could you kind of describe to me, you've been there for a little bit, what are you seeing on the ground and what have you been focusing on?
So we're making a documentary with Popular Front about the kind of mobilization of citizen militias in the city. Specifically, we focused on Kiev because I find it interesting because, it's a strategic city. Russian troops are literally a 4-hour drive away on the border with Belarus. And for the last 8 years of the war, Kiev has kind of disconnected itself a little bit, from the war. I remember one time a soldier said to me, like, you know more about this war than like my cousin who lives in Kiev, So I think a lot of people almost not forgot, but it just wasn't really on their radar. Now all of a sudden the war is kind of potentially on their doorstep again, and you've got people from all over the city joining voluntarily this kind of citizen militia that the army has kind of put together, and various other paramilitary groups. So we're focusing on that. We're making a documentary about it, and at the same time we'll be talking about the kind of will they, won't they, all sorts of aspects of the situation.
And, I hear different things. On one end, you hear reports that journalists talk to citizens who are out to bars and this and that and don't take this seriously or don't think Russia's going to invade. But you're obviously talking to people who are citizen militia and very much are readying to prepare or are preparing for a possible invasion. It seems like there's a gap between certain groups that kind of think this is much to do about nothing.
I don't think anyone thinks it's much to do about nothing. I certainly haven't heard that whatsoever. I've heard people, there's like nearly 200,000 Russian troops on the border. No one thinks there's nothing going on. But certainly like a lot of people are like, it's not going to happen. It's being blown out of proportion. People are, the way a lot of the mainstream press are reporting this, when you see it, it's as if like, Ukrainians walk around with rifles everywhere. That's just not how it is. This is a metropolitan city, very cool people, very nice culture, all sorts going on. A vibrant kind of media, art scene, whatever, all sorts is happening here. And that hasn't just stopped. But that being said, people are preparing. Even people that say it's not going to happen, you talk to them a little bit more and they are a little bit worried. Of course they are. And they're kind of, well, actually, maybe. We were out yesterday filming at one of these citizen militia things, and we spoke to one guy who's training to learn firearms just in case. And he was like, no, it's not going to happen, but maybe. And then, whilst they were training in this field or this area, a lot of lads and a girl on dirt bikes were just having fun, and they came across them. We spoke to them and they're kind of like, they're like, the threat is real, but I guess they weren't training or anything. So there's a mix. I think people have people, especially like hyper online people, have a real reaction to project some kind of ideas onto that. To be honest, that would happen anywhere. I think any city in the world would, find it it's almost like people can't understand it. Like, how could this happen here? And when it does, then they'll realize or whatever. But I wouldn't say people aren't worried, but they're not as worried as perhaps, Joe Biden is, but, put it that way.
And could you reported from some of the separatist areas a couple of years ago in 2016. Yeah. Could you kind of talk about that from 2016 to now? What are the differences in terms of? I know you're not there now; you're in Kiev. But what are the differences between years ago and now in terms of kind of conditions on the ground?
All right, it's a good question. I think one of the main things is, like I said previously, Kiev is now fully aware of the war. If they don't invade, at least now they're prepared a little bit better. I think also the East, from what I'm hearing from people that are there, and I know some soldiers out there, they're saying it's the heaviest shelling they've seen for 3 years. That doesn't mean it's the worst it's ever been, because, about 4 or 5 years ago, it was probably the worst it's been. But it's different in the sense that it's different in the sense that people are aware of it a little bit more, and now the press is suddenly taking notice of it. But there were like 50 young men on the Ukrainian side killed in the Donbass last year. The media is not really that interested in it. I don't know why. It's the only ongoing war in Europe right now, but it wasn't sexy enough for most of them, and then all of a sudden now they're interested again, which is good, don't get me wrong, but I guess that has changed, but I guess that can also go back as well. But I just think people are more aware of it now, and I think the world is becoming more aware of Ukraine as well. It's not this kind of backwater. It's an absolutely massive country with millions and millions of people here. And, it's good people here, very good people. They don't deserve to be invaded. And it's the same on the Russian side. There's loads of good people in Russia who were against this. I just saw a video about 20 minutes ago of an old man in Moscow holding up a sign saying no war with Kiev. Within 5 seconds, he's manhandled and arrested by the police there. So, this doesn't make sense for anybody. I mean, no matter what your radical political online affiliation is, generally, I think that's irrelevant. The situation will be lots and lots of people that are completely innocent will die here if the invasion does happen. And I think people are kind of, becoming more aware of the threat than they were previously because it's coming close to them. Maybe.
And could you kind of separate fact and fiction? Because reports have said there's been a lot increase in shelling over the last few days, but the separatists claim that the Ukrainians are the ones firing, and the Ukrainians obviously the Ukrainian soldiers are claiming that the Russian-backed separatists are the ones firing. So, what's fact versus fiction there?
Well, I'm not there, so I can't tell you exactly, but I can tell you from experience that I've had whilst being on the separatist side. I went there and I made a documentary there. I mean, pretty much the whole time that it was on a press tour, we weren't allowed to do anything freely. The documentary I made, we kind of showed that they were doing this ridiculous press tour. I mean, you get a lot of these idiots on the internet think it's some kind of like communist utopia. Not at all. It's like no one really cares about communism there. They have Nazi battalions as well. They have fully fledged Nazi battalions. No one cares about communism there. It's like this weird kind of throwback to some kind of, regime type feel to it. Everyone had a curfew. They took us to see this old woman and they were like, oh, she loves the leader here. And when she was holding up this paper with him on it, she was like, is that him? And they were like, yeah, it is him. And then she said to them, why did you bring me this paper with him on it? He looks ugly here, kind of joking, kind of showed that she didn't have that paper herself. They brought it to her. And then they took us to an area, I think it was Zaitsevo, where they were like, oh, yeah, there's going to be a gun battle here soon. Lo and behold, it happened in about, 5 minutes after we were there. And it felt very weird. It didn't feel right at all. I've been to probably, God knows, dozens of front lines in my life. You know what I mean? The 10 years I've been doing this. Didn't feel right. Felt very strange.
Like staged? Like staged?
Yeah, it felt staged. Yeah, it felt staged. It felt odd. I'll give you an example of why. When we went to the Donetsk airport, which is an absolute shell, that was a very tense place. There was Ukraine snipers, whatever. And all of the minders that we were with were wearing their helmets and their flak jackets. When we went to Zaitsevo, none of them bothered to put them on, which I found strange, So anyway, when we got back, we kind of geolocated the areas, had a look, spoke to some specialists. And it turns out we weren't really even facing the Ukrainian lines there. About a month after I was there, in the same area, the separatists got caught on hot mic saying, oh, we've got Ukrainian uniforms. We can fake it, to a French press team. That's all documented. That's all out there. People can check it. So the idea that, they would never pretend that there was an attack is insane. Anyone would. I'm not saying Ukrainians wouldn't either, but I've seen it happen there. So I find it very hard to believe, not that Ukraine's some kind of excellent, angelic country, but I find it very hard to believe that the Ukrainians would decide to start randomly shelling into Rostov, which is actually in Russia, which is what the separatists are claiming. Why would they do that right now at literally like fever pitch for possible invasion? It just seems like nonsense, man, to me. Maybe it's true. I don't know. I'm not there, like I said. But I also saw a video today where the separatists were sharing it and they were saying, oh, it's, this is a close quarters battle with Ukrainian troops. And there was no return fire. It was like, well, where is it? The other day, they shared some video claiming that it was Ukrainians attacking them and they caught them. And on the audio, they're speaking Polish. And then they said, oh, yeah, well, it's Polish paramilitaries hired by Ukraine. Like, what? It doesn't make, maybe, who knows? And then again, the other day, when the leader of the Luhansk People's Republic released the video saying that, you know, full mobilization, Ukrainians are planning an attack on us, people looked at the metadata when it was on Telegram, and it turns out the video was recorded 2 days previous. Like, come on, what's going on? Now, that doesn't mean that Ukraine is above doing that, but Ukraine wants to be a part of NATO. Ukraine wants to be close to Europe, Western Europe, so they're less likely to do that kind of shenanigans, in my opinion. Not that either of those sides are good, bad, whatever. I don't care about all that political nonsense. At the end of the day, war is war. It's bigger than an argument on Twitter. And I think people are really trying to blur the lines. They're like, I don't like NATO, so therefore Ukraine are like, I don't like NATO. I think NATO is a fucking clown of an organization, and they don't really give a shit about war unless it's to do with their economic ambitions. However, it is what it is. I don't believe that, you know, Ukraine would be stupid enough to start firing like 132 millimeter mortar rounds into Rostov in the middle of this. To me, it doesn't make sense. But, you know, stranger things have happened. And maybe that is true. I heard that they shot up the water supply to poison it. Not seen any evidence of that. I heard that they're releasing chlorine bombs. You know, the Scepter's saying they've released chlorine bombs. Like, it doesn't make sense. I saw an Anna News, which is, you know, a Russian propaganda channel, very pro-separatist, on Telegram. They released a video literally yesterday saying, oh, this is footage of shelling in the Donbass. And actually, it was a 2015 video from Syria. And at the end of the video, in Arabic, you can hear someone saying, shut the door. You know, so this is the kind of tricks that are being pulled. So I think with that track record, you don't have to say, do you believe it? I think you can look at the track record and say it's definitely possible that they're messing about. Do you see what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important because you, as a documentary filmmaker, I mean, obviously you have opinions, but you're not really interested in the politics, whether Russia has a right to you know, want to invade Ukraine. Obviously, Russia was made promises after the fall of the Soviet Union that NATO wouldn't further move eastward, and NATO has. So obviously, Russia has a right in some regards to feel a threat as NATO moves further. But you're kind of like, you stay out of all that political stuff, and you're just trying to explain there's a lot of, let's just say, psychological games going on the ground.
I mean, I wouldn't say I stay out of that side. I'm talking about the, you know, the hyper opinionated radicals on Twitter who are just boring. I don't get involved in that. But, you know, I take your point. I think that's accurate. You know, I think anyone thinking that, like, Russia has no feeling to be annoyed, you know, that's ridiculous. But at the same time, why is Russia doing what they're doing? They poisoned people in my country with polonium. They killed a civilian in my country, in Britain, you know, by doing some shenanigans there they shouldn't have been doing. Why are they doing that? You know what I'm saying? It's like nobody is the good guy here. This idea that it's a football match is a clown situation. And at the end of the day, Ukraine is a sovereign country. They rose up to fight against, you know, the authoritarian government, the pro-Russian government that they had. In 8 years, they built a military. They've had militias, whatever. And who says they don't have a right to their sovereignty? What, because some like leftist on Twitter is angry at somebody they've never met? Who cares? Right. At the end of the day, if Russia does this, probably millions of people will be killed. Are we going to then say, oh, well, you know, fair play to Russia, NATO expanded? I mean, you know, it's chalk and cheese. You're talking about, like, you know, NATO, which, again, like I said, I'm not a fan of NATO, and they have definitely pushed back further than they should have or whatever. But NATO isn't trying to kill like 1 million people right now in a country, which is probably what will happen if they invade. So I really don't, I feel like it's semantics to say that. It's gone way past that. You know, we were just out here today. There's old women walking around that can barely get into the metro station. The government hasn't even prepared the bomb shelters here properly at all. If there's an airstrike on this city, if there's an attack, loads and loads of people will be pulped, you know, and then someone on Twitter is going to write a 50 tweet thread about, well, NATO shouldn't have moved forward. You know, that is callous. That is callous. Right. I care about people on the ground. You know, I don't really care about, oh, well, this one shouldn't do that one. Yeah, geopolitics is involved, but when it gets to the combat stage, it's not that simple, you know.
And can you kind of talk about the U.S.'s role? Because you mentioned in the separatist areas, there's full-bred Nazi soldiers, and the U.S., on my understanding, is the U.S. has been backing and supplying a lot of those Nazi soldiers.
So I was on about the separatist side. There's Nazis there as well. You don't hear much about them because it doesn't really fit the narrative of it's a communist utopia. But on the Ukraine side, there's a massive problem with, you know, far right activity as well, without a doubt. There's a whole battalion of like far right, you know, the Azov battalion, as we know. I don't know if the US has been directly supplying them. It wouldn't surprise me. But, you know, this is where you get the two camps. You get the kind of tanky side that are like, the Ukraine is a Nazi junta, right? Well, let's look at the truth behind that, okay? So in the last elections, all of the fascist parties combined together got less than 5% of the vote. And in that same vote, overwhelmingly, the country voted in a Jewish president. Now, if that's a Nazi junta, it's the worst one I've ever heard of in my life. You know what I'm saying? But this is Eastern Europe. Surprise, it's not the liberal haven or the leftist haven that Americans want it to be. There is a big problem with neo-Nazis and there's a big problem with radical extremism. But at the same time, does that mean the whole country is Nazi? Does that mean every soldier you meet is a Nazi? Absolutely not. It's ridiculous. It's insane. You know, like it's juvenile to say so. And you could argue that, well, because there's less of the separatists and they have had whole Nazi battalions, they too have a Nazi problem, but nobody wants to talk about that side of it. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's disgusting. Don't get me wrong. They make me sick. But it's bigger than that right now. It's not like, oh, can we score, points off of each other on Twitter because there's a Nazi and there's a Nazi there? Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad. But, the other day I was with a militia. This is no offense to Americans, but it's like they can't understand that a country is diverse and mixed and has different levels of things going on. For example, I was filming with a militia the other day. One lad there is clearly a far right guy. He had some patch on his arm that said let's start another crusade, fucking moron. And then there's another lad there who's an Indian. He's an Indian volunteer. He's traveled all the way from India and he's fighting for Ukraine. And there's other lads there that are American and they like him and he's a part of their group, no problem. This was a militia that's from Georgia. You know what I mean? So, yep. And again, in the war, there were far right groups fighting alongside Muslim battalions in Ukraine for Russia. So, war isn't as simple as, which political side? Yes, there's a Nazi problem. Is Ukraine a Nazi junta? Utter idiocy to say so. I'd say anybody who thinks that, come to Kiev. Come and see what Kiev looks like. If you think this is a Nazi city, you'll be very, very shocked very quickly, And there's other people. I know, so another example, there's anarchists who've been training here. And I know for a fact, I can't say which group, but there were anarchists at the training I was at yesterday, and they're going to fight, not for the state, they're going to fight because they're like, we don't want to be taken over by what is a very clearly authoritarian government. If you read about a couple of the laws in Russia, this idea that it's some kind of bastion of progressive thought is madness. Not that the Ukraine government is, don't get me wrong. I don't think, I think they're doing loads bad. I think it's really sickening that they don't seem to care that they have supplied a column of tanks to what is an openly far right battalion. But at the end of that, I don't live here and I'm not going to be killed and my house won't be destroyed should this invasion happen. So, you know what I mean? I kind of look at it away from that perspective. In our documentary, of course, we will address it. Of course, we will talk about it. And I'll probably be cancelled or whatever for saying all of this about it. But, real life is not the internet. And I think if there's anywhere where that's obvious, it's in Kiev right now.
Right. And the U.S. has armed all sorts of rebels
the US will give guns to anybody. The US has no morals whatsoever. I mean, the US talks about progressivism and then funds Saudi Arabia, like a country where you can be murdered for being gay. It's insane. I think people need to stop looking at countries if they're moral or this moral thing. People talk about the EU in my country. The EU, it's some moral arbiter. The EU has facilitated the slave trade in Libya. The EU is the reason that people drown in the sea when they come here as refugees because they've spent billions on Fortress Europe. You know what I mean? It's not about the morals of the thing. For me, it's about the people it's going to affect on the ground. And I think people should focus on that more than trying to tear strips off of each other when it comes to politics. You see what I mean, Jordan?
Yeah. And can I ask you about the U.S. too? Because you've been speaking with people in Kiev. President Zelenko basically was saying for quite a bit, let's not create panic here. It seemed like without calling out President Biden, he was low-key telling America to stop, making predictions and stop inflaming the situation. What do people think in terms of America's role here? Because I've been seeing on CNN and elsewhere for 3 weeks, they're about to invading in several days. Now Biden came out saying, we believe within a couple of days. Do people in Kiev believe that America has basically been beating the drum for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think people generally just see Biden as like a bit of a clown. You know what I mean? Like, I can't remember exactly, but I think we were asking some girl the other day, and she said oh, no invasion yet, and they were kind of like, yeah, ask America when it's starting, you know, that kind of thing. I can't get my head around why America keeps dropping this kind of, it's this day, it's this day, it's this day. There is a theory that they have an insider, and they're letting Russia know we have someone. You know what I mean? We're telling them, you know, maybe Russia heard him. Like, what happened? Like, you know what I mean? I don't know. But it doesn't really help the economy here in Ukraine at all. The economy is suffering. You know, flights are being cancelled. My flight was cancelled on the way in. I had to book another one. But yeah, the day I arrived was meant to be the day of the invasion. Then it was the next day. Then it was, you know, within 48 hours. There's no invasion still, but it doesn't mean it can't happen. You know, I mean, it doesn't mean it won't start. It just means maybe America's got some weird intel. Maybe they're playing a game. Everybody's playing a game here. The situation that I focus on more is, you know, the almost 200,000 troops are on the border. All of a sudden, lo and behold, there's a flare up in the east, and then today, Belarus has just said, oh no, the Russians are going to stay here for these training exercises because of what's happening in the east in Ukraine, which, what does that have to do with Belarus? I don't get. And then the separatists have said, oh, well, if this clashing gets bad, then we're going to ask Russia for help. You know, it feels like a very big pretext to kind of war. And I think really, I mean, personally, you know, I'm a reporter, but I'm not a psychopath. I have feelings and opinions. I think Biden's a clown, but I do think it would be unusual for them to really come out with this if they didn't have some intel. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, but it just, on a geopolitical level, it would be quite weird, I think. You know what I mean? It would just seem like, why they're doing it. So I think everybody's playing games. But here, sorry to answer your question, here generally people are just, they're kind of like, oh yeah, thanks for giving us weapons sort of thing, because, you know, you would take what you can at that stage. But I think they're also a bit like kind of bored of it, you know, like, right, we heard it. It's becoming a joke, you know what I mean? It is becoming a meme kind of. Hopefully all of this is some weird game to disrupt Europe and not actually cause insane bloodshed. You know what I mean? But who knows? Who knows?
Mm-hmm. And lastly, obviously, you know, not going to predict, but if there is an invasion, how bad does that look on the Ukraine side? And if there's not, where do things go from here? Because it's not like if Russia doesn't invade, it's not like everything just goes back to, you know, rainbows and sunshine.
Yeah, that is true, mate. I think it depends how they invade. If they do invade, they might do some weird kind of pincer movement that I've seen theorized by, you know, people smarter than me. They're saying, you know, they'll probably come in through East Ukraine, go over at the north, Dnieper River, like maybe, you know, pass by there and cut off Kiev that way. And at the same time come in from, you know, Crimea and stuff like that, which is the way they're all positioned is very possible. They also have Transnistria right in the west, you know, in Moldova, that strange cut off region, which I don't think they have troops there, that many troops, but I'm sure they could make something happen. And I think if they did that, it would just be devastating. You know, it would be absolutely devastating. The bloodshed would be something we haven't seen in Europe for maybe since the Balkans. You know what I mean? However, if they do that and they try and take Kiev, you know, I read a statistic the other day, or my friend was telling me about actually, that like for every, you know, to hold Kiev, for every one Russian soldier, for every one you know, resident in Kiev, they probably need like 10 Russian soldiers. If they do that, it will be a guerrilla war forever. You know what I mean? It'll be very brutal. Russia obviously has the upper hand in terms of experience and equipment, but the idea that the Ukrainians will just go down quiet, it just won't be like that, man. I mean, we saw it in 2014 when they sent the separatists in and the Green Little Men when they annexed Crimea. We saw that, you know, the Ukrainians stepped up and, you know, they became militias. Unfortunately, some of them were fascist. Many of them weren't, you know what I mean? But yeah, you know what I'm saying? It's one of them situations where the culture here, it's very unlikely that they would just lie down. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we've seen that over the last couple of days where people are training. Even if 1% of those people that we saw training end up becoming guerrilla units and start urban warfare, that's going to be a very big headache for Russia. And it's not just in Kiev. The Ukrainians have a new thing called the territorial defense. It's all over the country right now. Everybody's training, women, men, elderly, you know, young, everything. Or what I think is more likely, if it does happen, I think they'll kind of try and take the Donbass in full. So right now, you know, the separatists have Donetsk and Luhansk and some other smaller regions.
So just so I could explain for the audience, the Donbas is in eastern Ukraine, and it's separatist controlled.
So the Donbass is the region in eastern Ukraine. Yeah, sorry. I mean, it's a full 8-hour drive away from Kiev. It's very far, maybe longer. It's like 12 hours on the train or something, 16 hours. And the Donbass is like, you know, like a province, if you like, a region. And within that, there are various other places, Avdiivka, Shirokina, like, you know, areas controlled by Ukraine. But in the farthest part of the east, on the border with Russia, it's the two areas, big areas, Donetsk and Luhansk, are controlled by the separatists, the Russian-backed separatists, you know. And, you know, they are pro-Russian. They see themselves as ethnically Russian, which, you know, fine by them, absolutely fine. But they have had help from Russia. You know, I've seen it with my own eyes. You know, they had Ural Russian military trucks there, and people were telling us, like, yeah, I was in the Russian military, but I took off my patches and volunteered here. It's like, okay, which is possible, but I don't know. But anyway, you know, so that's the region there. And I think it's more likely that they will move from Donetsk and Luhansk to take the rest of the Donbass, you know what I mean? Avdiivka, Shirokina, maybe even move into like this area, Kharkiv, which is like a very big strategic city in the east. Maybe they'll do that. I think that's more likely. But then it's like, well, if they get that, what would stop them going further? You know, who knows? I don't know. I really hope it doesn't happen. You know, I really think it will be sad. This, you know, Russia is a great country. I'm not a fan of the Kremlin. I'm not a fan of any government, but, you know, Russia is a great country, amazing people. Lots of people I speak to, friends in Russia, are like, this is outrageous. Why would they do this? The sanctions that the West will put on them, it won't hurt Putin. You know, he's already made billions or whatever he is on the sly, but it will hurt the people. It will hurt businesses. You know, that's not fair. and it's like, what's going to happen? So, I don't know. It'll be a horrible situation for them, and it will be even worse, obviously, for Ukrainians because they will just be slaughtered. But you know, I've seen some ridiculous kind of takes on Twitter that are like, "Oh, Ukrainians will be done in 2 days," and I would keep your eye on that because I don't think that will happen. I think the military, you know, they'll do what they can. They don't stand much of a chance, but that's not how the war will be fought. You know, it will become a proxy war, a hybrid war, guerrilla warfare is what will happen. And sorry to go on so much, but you know, I'm quite passionate about the situation here now because there's so much disinformation going around and so much stupid partisan takes from left and right. It's just ridiculous. You got, like, you know, these fucking idiot US Republicans acting like, you know, like the like Ukraine is some kind of squeaky clean place, as if, like, you know, real life doesn't happen here. And then you've got kind of, you know, like CCP supporting like American communists, like 15-year-olds that are like, yeah, this communist utopia fighting the Nazi junta. Like, it's really annoying. But if they don't invade, then what happens, right? It's like you're saying, is there just a constant fear? Is Russia just going to forever leave troops on the border? What is the plan there? You know what I mean? I really don't get it. It's going to cost Russia a lot of money either way. It's already probably cost them so much money. Why? You know, what is it? Is it a way to kind of get more promises from the West? Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know, man. I think if they don't, it will just leave everybody on edge. Maybe that's the plan, but it seems like a lot to do to just put people on edge. I do think I'm like 80% convinced that they will do something quite big. Am I convinced that's a full assault on Kiev? Probably not. You know, the US said, oh, there'll be airstrikes within 2 days. Who knows? You know, who knows? But I don't see that personally. But we don't know. I'm not an intelligence agent. You know what I mean? I don't know what's going on. But I don't know, man. Whatever happens, it will be very messy, very horrible. But hopefully it doesn't happen. You know what I mean? I hope America's wrong. I really do.
And I think you brought up an important point because sanctions have already really hurt Russia. And I think American media just talks about sanctions like, oh, we'll just put sanctions on without actually realizing that causes people to go hungry. It could cause death. We've done it in Venezuela and many other places. Absolutely, so there's real people that are going to suffer from this.
That's the thing. Yeah, it's so true. It's like I heard CNN talking the other day, like Russia as if it's some monolith. You know what I mean? As if everybody in Russia is like, yes, Putin. You know, they're I think like literally months ago, because this build-up has been happening for a while. Last year, I did a podcast on Popular Front about the build-up. You know, it was quite a while ago. It's been happening for, and then it backed off, and then it came back. And when that was happening, I think within like a week of them amassing troops on the border, there were like 100 people in Moscow which maybe not a lot, but it's risky to protest in Moscow if if you're not kind of fitting into the fold properly. And they were out there like saying, don't attack the Ukrainians. Obviously, people go, oh, they all must be Nazis. It's like, oh, really? Right, okay, whatever. But there were people kind of taking that risk to say, don't do it. Russians are, good, generally good people. Most Russians I've met, great people, and they don't want to have sanctions. They don't want to like starve to death for the sake of some like crazy plan to invade this country. I think like, what is that really necessary? Invade a whole country to do what? And like you said, it's not the state. The state is already rich. The state has been gobbling money. It's the same in America. It's not the state's kids that go to war, right? It's not the state's kids that come back from war and then have to work in a 9 to 5 like with PTSD. That's not how it works. The government always is on top. And sanction is not going to affect them, especially when they're stealing money left and right, or in America's case, they're doing insider trading and having it kind of accepted by Pelosi and all that nonsense. So each government has their own revenue stream. We saw that Putin was planning to build some insane mansion with a strip club in it recently, and it's like, if you look at what he actually earns, it doesn't make sense. So obviously he's got money. Obviously he's not going to go hungry. Same way with America, they wouldn't, same way it wouldn't happen to them. It's like the same with Venezuela, like you just said, you had Maduro eating food on TV whilst people were literally eating out of bins, due to sanctions and various other things. So yeah, I mean, I think people need to stop talking about countries like they're just a monolith, like they're just the government or whatever. On both sides, though, on both sides. But the funny thing is, people will argue that and say, oh, yeah, well, of course, it's, all Russians aren't this or whatever. And you can't really put sanctions because not everybody in Russia is the same. But then at the same time, they'll go, oh, yeah, everybody in Ukraine is a Nazi because of Azov. It's like, well, what do you want it to be? You can't have, you don't want the cake and they want to eat it. You have to see everything is diverse, everything is mixed up. And, sorry, war doesn't go the way you want it to. Sorry that there's bad people with bad ideologies on this side of the war. You know what I'm saying? There are people that were training with Azov who were like not Nazis, but they're the best disciplined, which unfortunately fascists are often well disciplined because they're like order. So it's like, well, they're the best disciplined or whatever, so I'll go and train with them. It doesn't mean that we didn't see them. We haven't been with Azov. I know other people have, but you know what I'm saying? It's just things are a mess. When war happens, a lot of the the lovely politics that people hold goes out the window, and they just go, "Who's going to save me?" When Azov, again, I don't fucking like them. I've literally filmed with them. I've done work on them. I exposed the training camp they did for kids and showed that half the people working there had neo-Nazi tattoos. You know what I mean? I despise it. I got a DuPont award for reporting on neo-Nazi terrorist groups in America. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that they're fine. It is there. It's the real threat. But when Azov went to Mariupol and they stopped an old woman's house from getting bombed because they fought back, that old woman is not going to go, sorry, lads, don't like the political ideology, just let me get bombed. You know what I mean? Right. And that's what we're talking about. That's the realities of life for people out here. And, they're going to take what they can. And sorry that doesn't please everybody on the internet, but unfortunately, that's how it is. I will say, though, like the Azov is actually a very, very small part of the fighting force. You know what I mean? The first time I went to the kind of roughest area in Ukraine, in the prom zone, we went with the special forces. And their commander was an Afghan, you know what I mean? And everybody was like, yeah, no, who cares? You know what I'm saying? So it's not as kind of straightforward as anybody thinks it is. I'm sure, I'll be called a Nazi and like a lib or whatever from each side by saying that. But the reality is people on the ground have not got brainworms from the internet. And I think that people on the media are absorbing all of that. And there's also just like hardcore neoconservative saber rattling and there's almost bloodlust, you know what I mean? Like, right, almost bloodlust from some people, it feels like, and that is a very sickening thing I've seen in the media, you know what I mean?
Well, I think in America also, because there was so much made up nonsense about Russia and Trump over the last few years.
Yeah.
Russiagate and a lot of things later came that, none of that was true. That a lot of people then look at it and basically, not that they're defending Russia, but that they just think everything is made up as far as Russia, because there was so much nonsense and propaganda that Trump was working with Putin and all this stuff. So they maybe don't take Putin and Russia as much of a threat as he might be.
Right. No, I agree completely. And you got one side where, okay, they looked at that and go, right, most of that was bullshit. which is funny because they did a full report on it, but then like, you know, Kamala Biden fans will just be like, don't worry about the facts now. You know what I mean? Only worry about the facts when we care. But at the same time, then they'll just read some like mental separatist propaganda and go, yeah, that's true. It's like, come on, you know what I mean? It's like, just, you know, keep an open mind, but don't let your brain fall out your head. You see what I'm saying? But no, I agree. There's just, you know, I'm from Britain. I've not been to America, and some of the stuff, the way people talk about Russia over there just seems alien to me. You know what I mean? It's like under every rock, there's a Russian or a Nazi for some people over there, you know, and if you don't have the correct opinion, you're out the door. It's stupid. I saw it as well in Canada. They were like, all of the truckers, well, they got to be Russian backed. It's like anything that's like, we don't like it, it has to be backed by this kind of boogeyman, you know. I just think that's an endemic problem on both sides. We're seeing it on the other side as well, where it's like, oh no, the people in Ukraine can't possibly come together and fight for their country. It has to be some kind of scandalous, you know, ideology behind it. So yeah, I mean, you make a great point there, man. I think I don't know. I'm not saying like I've got all the answers. I just think chill out, everybody. Chill out and see what's actually happening. You know what I'm saying?
Jake Hanrahan, thanks so much for joining me. Everybody could check him out at Popular Front. It's popularfront.co. Thanks again. Thanks for watching, and make sure to tune in to Status Coup's daily live stream Monday through Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time and Fridays at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.